Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to our LinkedIn Live. I'm James Hogbin, and joining me is Eric Gaffin. My name, obviously, is James Hogbin. I just said that bit. Not at all embarrassing doing these things. I'm the founder and CEO of Fingerprint Supervision. We are a compliance, automation, and policy-driven electronic communications provider. We work with service providers, and we have a full toolkit that's been developed with regulatory hosts and chief compliance outsourcing officer services in the US to provide multiple firms supervision in one system. And part of that journey that we've been on is recognizing that not only do service providers need the policy tools, the automation tools, and the platforms to do supervision, they also need seriously good IT advice, attestation, and auditing services to go along with it for their clients. And that's where Eric comes in. Eric, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'd like to extend my thanks, of course, to James and the Fingerprint team for inviting me to contribute to today's discussion. Allow me just to provide a brief overview of my background and how it relates to today's session. For over 3 decades, I've held positions within the technology and financial services sectors. I've been honored to serve in several pivotal executive roles, such as that of corporate controller, CIO, CTO, and CISO. Primarily guiding the strategic and technical direction of mid-sized financial services firms. In recent years, I've utilized this technical expertise developed over time across multiple regulated verticals within my independent consulting practice here at Broadwalk IT, where I function as an outsourced virtual CIO and CISO. I support organizations primarily in the financial services and managed services provider sectors, assisting them in navigating the intricate world of IT and cybersecurity compliance while crafting unique digital transformation solutions for their businesses. My personal practice methodology draws directly from that previous knowledge and experience I've garnered while serving as an audit support lead in over 50 regulatory and independent audit engagements within those both commercial as well as consulting projects. I've interfaced with a broad spectrum of regulatory bodies, including SEC, FINRA, CFTC, NFA, OCC, and other exchanges, as well as, of course, independent auditors or audits adhering to standards such as SOC 2, PCI DSS, OCR, and ISO. In terms of qualifications, I hold several advanced InfoSec certs, including the healthcare-specific HCISPP, a cloud-centric CCSP, and the globally recognized CISSP designation. Of course, I'm excited today to bring this blend of technical and regulatory expertise over those 3+ decades to the conversations that James and I will have.
Eric, thank you very much. And that is a super impressive set of qualifications. So thank you very much for bringing that to bear this afternoon. So I'd just like to set the scene on the growth opportunity that we see for service providers in this space. Just step back one step from how the service providers come into it and look at the entire market for supervision. Now, the regulators clearly are requiring an enhanced supervision to be undertaken over regulated firms. And this is the same the world over. We're seeing the SEC, the FCA, the MAS all issue notices and fines for use of unapproved communications, for organizing mistrading within chat rooms, for allowing coercive sales practices and mis-selling to be undertaken through lightly monitored channels such as voice and LinkedIn and other sort of client-driven channels that probably aren't even known to the corporates where the sales are taking place. And given the regulatory focus on this area, it's forcing firms to take a slightly more proactive approach than going to the archive and searching some documents once a month. Now, the more foresighted firms have put in automated policy-based processes to do this. So within their compliance dashboard, they've set up once a month a task to say, we will go and search some emails, we'll go and search some WhatsApps, we'll go and search some voice and see if we can find anything in these areas. And state of the art at the moment is probably random search across those sampled information sets that are generated once a month. The regulators have begun to say, that's all right, but it's not kind of where we're going. We would like a much more comprehensive approach. Number one, to capturing, and number two, to supervising the content of the communications within your environment. And that is going now from just simple email through to social channels. How are firms looking at WhatsApp? How are firms looking at WeChat, Signal? And the big one, which is iMessage, which everybody has on their iPhones, which is a very difficult thing to look at, to comply, to archive, but yet is used extensively within the management of most firms. So the regulators would like the industry to do a better job of capturing and supervising it. In terms of providers, there are provider services out there. There are some very big compliance consultancies and law firms that offer review services, where they have a number of consultants that spend 2 or 3 days a month sitting in a client's systems, doing some searches and seeing if there's anything there. And that is a reasonable business. It's a human-intensive business. It solves a short-term problem for all concerned. The consultants can bill out some of their staff. The regulated firms can say, look, we've got a top flight consultant doing this for us, so it must be good, mustn't it? The issue there is, for the consultancy, it's a very resource intensive solution, and also it strays into the boundaries of IT. Now, I'll allow Eric to explain in just a minute the technical aspects, but if you're offering a service around comms supervision, you can't get away from the fact that you need to go into your client firms and say, this is a fleet management issue. We need to put devices into a management framework, such as Intune or Jamf or any of the provider, the Microsoft or the Apple provider management frameworks, just to be able to do compliance on them. Eric, can you talk a little about how fleet management is such a pain in the neck for outsourced providers?
Well, in my experience with commercial brokerage entities, let's say those as FINRA registered broker-dealers, for argument's sake, the fact that the majority of their APs are remote staff members, either working in what is considered branch office or potentially our home or remote location, the fact that they are part of that communication workflow, utilizing, generally speaking, BYOD or of course a personal device to communicate with their end customers. So whether that's iMessage, whether that's a chat application such as WhatsApp, or any other mobile-based or tablet-based application, and even their endpoints themselves, whether it be laptops or desktops, is always a challenge in terms of managing or controlling that communication flow. Generally speaking, in the broker-dealer space, a lot of those remote parties might be conducting other activities outside of course, the FINRA space. And in those scenarios, there is that much more of a control issue for the broker-dealer in how do they deploy an acceptable method of control over those devices, especially if those devices potentially are used for both personal as well as business use. So third-party applications that can be tightly coupled to these channels can then channel the archiving directly to a back-end storage or an archiving environment, and allow, from a supervision perspective, a consolidation of those multitude of channels, is something that technically has been a challenge for, I would say, in my particular experience, of course, the smaller to mid-size organizations that don't have the technical personnel and infrastructure and tools in place to accomplish it, as well as the workflow or the mechanism by which they can automate the workflow around that. Acting as a governance, risk, and compliance professional myself, and of course, I'm sure everybody on this call today, has forced us to change the methodology by which we can supervise or oversee such a large swath of personnel in diverse locations, and have the ability to protect that content from a data security standpoint. Again, remote personnel, whether they're utilizing those devices at their partner home location, or are on mass transit, or potentially are in their local Starbucks, there's always that concern of shoulder surfing and other methods by which they may inadvertently disclose information. So data security, as well as the obligation for communication compliance, are running hand in hand from a technical perspective for these customers or clients. Elements of risk management, again, from a compliance supervisory perspective, there is that inherent need for access and simplicity when querying this type of data. And again, having these multiple channels of communication across a multitude of different devices provides again, a technical hurdle or challenge for these small to mid-sized organizations, finding a solution that tightly couples to their IT infrastructure and their cybersecurity or information security requirements, as well as meets their compliance obligations and their supervisory obligations from the standpoint of consolidating and making that process efficient.
So I think from Eric's point, there are a number of themes that have happened that have worried the regulators. Number one is the pandemic-based working at home. All of a sudden, you've got traders and salespeople operating off either their home environment, which is utterly unmonitored, or on some IT that's been cobbled together by the IT department and sent out to them, and is lightly monitored at best. Now, the regulators have a pretty zero tolerance approach to what is and isn't saved. Certainly within the SEC FINRA rules, very prescriptive about even how things are stored at various bits and pieces of the data lifecycle. The European regulators, not so much on that. The European regulators, in an inimitable European style, on principle base, say, yeah, you should either keep it or block it, which is subtly different. And they look backwards rather than forwards, and say, after the event, you should have done, rather than before the event, this is what you must do. But both European and US regulators have stated that firms have to do a much better job of recording everything. So, number one, for any service provider wandering into this space to do comms supervision, ensuring that the IT of the client is absolutely robust and capturing and storing everything correctly is a prerequisite to offering a service around it. Now, there is a clear line between archiving, which is storing stuff, and supervising, which is scanning content and making value-based decisions in compliance terms as to whether it's malfeasance or just a false positive. So within the marketplace, traditionally, the activity that communication supervision has been undertaken on is the archive system. There are some very big vendors, Global Relay, Smarsh, Proofpoint, Enterprise Vault, whose entire modus operandi and reason for being is storing bits of information. Now, as a compliance person, it's a great repository to go and do a few searches in those systems. However, what that doesn't give you is any framework under which to do the searching. You are relying on good compliance people doing searches on data that is complete. And there are a number of holes in that thesis. The data may not be complete. The data may not be searchable in the format that you need to search. The search might not be relevance-based. It might be Boolean-based. So it brings back thousands and thousands of results with no real rhyme or reason, leaving the compliance person to sit there and go, I've done a search, I've got 4,000 emails, where do I go now? The other issue that's becoming absolutely critical to all of the regulators' requirement is voice traffic. Now, we're talking to you right now on a LinkedIn Live. If this were a promotion for my new fund, it's not, I don't have one, but if it were, then this should be recorded and analyzed for mis-selling. If this were a sales get-together, this should be recorded and analyzed in case I was going to tell my salespeople to sell 10-year term products to 90-year-olds as our sales strategy. And so this is just one channel. These channels are happening all over the desktop. People have got Teams open. Now, Teams, you chat in it, you share files in it, you video conference in it, you point-to-point video conference in it, and you can audio call in it, all of which needs to be collected, analyzed, searched, supervised, and archived. Now, when you get into voice, it is a nasty, messy, horrible thing because each different vertical, Zoom, Teams, WhatsApp, have a different way of recording and capturing voice. Plus, people have mobile telephones, desk phones, dealer boards, all of which need to be captured and analyzed. And if you're not careful, suddenly you're capturing voice across 7 or 8 different systems. Eric, I know you feel quite strongly about how voice is orthogonal to most archiving. What would you like to share those thoughts?
Sure. In my personal experience through projects with multiple customers, voice is probably one of the largest obstacles from the standpoint of consolidated archiving. Generally speaking, most firms have a dedicated voice recording and logging system that is connected to their voice over IP or PBX environment. And because that voice-based archive, even if there is transcription available through that product, generally speaking, that archive is distinctly segregated and separated from their other channels of communication. That poses, I believe, a huge challenge for communication supervision professionals, simply because of the fact that you do not have a consolidated archive. You don't have the context through which there have been conversations as well as texts and emails with a particular trading customer or partner. So the disconnect there, and this has been more of a technology disconnect, is an obstacle for risk management for both internal and external providers of compliance consulting services or oversight. We're now looking in most of our clients' environments for the methods by which we can tap into direct APIs, whether that's a third-party interface that is provided to it, or from my own personal experience with you, James, having asked for specific APIs to be built to a common carrier that, of course, has a large pool of customers worldwide. This is, I think, a pivotal capability that needs to be implemented within an archiving solution. This gets back to that prior comment you made about workflow efficiency. If I place my compliance hat on for a moment, if I want to make my life efficient and I want to deliver a viable service to my customers, ultimately I'm going to want to do that in the most efficient and effective way possible. And that's just not reducing my time and therefore my cost from a profitability standpoint, of course. It's the other element of risk. If my goal is to provide a tier 1 service to my clients, ultimately I'm looking for a way that I can capture everything in one place. I have a workflow that is built around that single archiving location. And voice recording plus transcription, which is key to this component, I need that voice file or that voice recording in a format that is similar to that which is captured for other comm channels, text-based. And in the case of voice, some element of sentiment analysis so I can determine what is the nature of the conversation between these individuals. Should I be concerned as a compliance overseer that there is, let's say, a trouble brewing with a customer, an individual is upset, an individual has been promised something, and the nature of how that was promised is something that in a lot of cases can't be captured in just text form, but in analyzing the sentiment associated with it, I might be able to gain unique insights, or at least give me the ability to be able to percolate those issues up to the surface to give my attention as an overseer to what is important in that particular case. So voice to me and voice transcription, call details, is every bit and parcel a puzzle piece to complete that puzzle of the picture of a conversation or communication channel or communications with a customer or trading partner.
Thank you. The other thing that I'll throw into that mix is natural local language processing. So we're obviously doing this LinkedIn Live in English. However, if I was presented as a compliance person with a chat that hopped between French and Italian, I may have a trouble understanding what I was looking at. So often on trading desks or in sales situations, you may well be selling in people's first language, which could be Spanish, it could be French, it could be Italian. And as a compliance person, you need to have an idea of what's being said. So as well as transcription services, translation services are also very important, because the nuance of a discussion in a local language has to be able to translate back to English for most compliance people to be able to make a value judgment as to whether the conversation is suspicious or not suspicious. And this goes for all text-based communication, whether it's email, Bloomberg chat, Slack chat, or voice conversation. You want to bring it all back to the language of the people that are doing the compliance. So we've outlined some of the regulators' concerns and some of the issues. I'd just like to take a step above this and say what good compliance looks like, because obviously as a compliance service provider, you're offering best practice to each one of your clients. And if you're a client, you're expecting to receive best practice. Now, obviously, the regulatory jurisdictions between Europe, Asia, and the US have differences. However, what isn't different between any of them is that compliance is all about policy. So the first thing that any compliance service provider or person that wants to do compliance supervision requires is a policy. And that policy has to speak to a number of different processes. So the policy needs to define what's being looked for. In terms of the surveillance architecture that you have within a firm, you need to be able to state clearly to the regulator, be they the data protection regulator or the financial regulator, what type of activity that you are going to look for. And if you're not looking for that activity, then maybe you should have guardrails down either side to check that the people that have the keys to the kingdom aren't going to look for the wrong things. So the policy states what you as a service provider will be looking for. Is it gifts and entertainment breaches? Is it collusion? Is it mis-selling? Is it clique building? Is it inappropriate language? So the policy should state that. The policy should also state over which channels you're looking, because there will be channels that are permitted in an environment and channels that are not permitted. So the policy should say, in our environment, we're looking for these types of activities across email, Bloomberg, and Slack, because as a policy point, we've banned WhatsApp, for instance. Now, to go with that policy, if you ban something, you also need the ability to go in and check that it is banned. So you can check on people's devices to see it's there. So the policy is saying what you're looking for it, where you're looking for it. The policy should also then state when you find something, what to do with it. How do you risk rank items? Are you going to bring up the relevance for certain lexicon-based things? Are you going to bring up the relevance for certain metadata-based things? People talking to each other, length of communication, size of attachment, people joining or leaving conversations. So what are you looking for? Where are you looking for it? And how are you ranking it? So that gives you the identification bit. And this is all policy driven. You've stated to the world within your policy, well, your world, your regulator and your data protection people and your internal lawyers, what you're overall searching for. Once you've defined that, you can say what you're going to do with it. So the policy will generate a number of items. So the next bit in the policy is to say, we are going to deal with the items this way. So we will have a triage process where the items we generate once a week, we'll go through all of them with a score above X or that are rated high or whatever. We will deal with important ones in this area within 2 days. So there's no doubt as to where you are. You've set what you're looking for, and then you've set how you're dealing with it. Then you need to set the path through it, because not everything you find is going to be important. Some of it's going to be a false positive, some of it's going to be innocuous, some of it will need investigating. So again, you need to state within your policy, so you've got a framework to report on, either to your client or to your internal stakeholders, how long it's taken to get to the outcome of it's just a false positive, or I've investigated it was a group of people traveling to Las Vegas for a party, versus it was actually bad malfeasance, it was misactivity, somebody's ripping off the expense system. If you get to that state, then you have to state how you're going to deal with it in the policy. Again, you set up a workflow. We're going to spend 5 days investigating it. We're going to spend 2 days reviewing it. We're going to spend a day signing it off. And at that, you can look at the workflow that you're operating within your environment and know that your policy is working. And finally, within the policy, it only lives if you update it. So you have to say, when are you going to look and review each item in there? Every 6 months, you're going to review which channels you're looking at. Every 3 months, you're going to review what you're looking for in each channel. Every year, you're going to review the output of all of the investigations that you've undertaken to see if the workflow is appropriate. And so that policy sits there and drives everything that you do. Now, if you're a service provider, you're going to want to provide either a policy from your service to your clients, or you're going to want to segment your clients into different types of people, RIAs, broker-dealers, independent financial advisors, wealth managers, and you're going to want a policy that looks for different behavior in each different class. But you do want to drive it from a policy so that you can write a contract to that policy. And then you can report back to the client using that policy. Because unless you can report on it, you can't bill on it. So you set up your policy, you set up your client. And that's what good looks like for communication supervision. It's policy driven and KPI reported, because every single interaction you have with your policy needs to be recorded. I looked at 18 items today. I processed through 27 investigations this month. I signed off 3 things as being nothing to see here, move on, and 2 of them as gifts and entertainments that I now need to hand to HR to deal with further as a policy breach. And so all of that reporting could be done either to the internal stakeholders, the regulator, or back to your clients. Now, all of this requires the IT framework to be in place to be able to implement that. So, in terms of dealing with loads of different clients, you're not going to want to do it as a one-er for each client. You're not going to want to put in an entire system to manage one client, and then tomorrow you get another client and you put in a whole nother system. That is an enormous build. What you want is a multi-client system. So you want to sit there and say, we're a compliance consultancy, we're a law firm, we're an IT consultancy. We've got 50, 100, 150, 200 clients. Now, we've got 10 operatives to cover those clients. We want to assign 1 operative to 15 clients. And that one operative has a view over everything that happens in those 15 clients. And they don't want to log in 15 times, once to each client, and run the searches in each client and then try and aggregate them across all of the bits and pieces. They want a single system that runs across everything. Eric, I know you feel very strongly about multi-tenancy and ticketing. Do you want to give us your experiences on that?
Sure. I think the audience can relate to the experience of having to enter in a trouble ticket, whether that's an internal IT team that you're going to when you have an issue or problem, or potentially an outsourced support provider where you've either called in or emailed in an issue or problem. Ticketing, quite frankly, is at the core of this multi-tenancy discussion. Having had extensive experience in the managed service provider space, one of the challenges that was overcome, honestly, more than a decade ago, is this issue of how does a provider support potentially hundreds of customers, potentially tens of thousands of end users through a single dashboard console, that single pane of glass. And then when issues or problems come to the surface through that ticketing process, the internal engineers or technical team members have the streamlined workflow associated with working those tickets, providing feedback, of course, to the end customer as to the status of that, and closing that ticket ultimately as a successful ticket experience for the end customer. That requires that element of queuing where, central repository, or in this case, a central location of supporting these multiple customers through a single pane of glass. The fact that one is working a ticket for company A or working a ticket separately for company B, the data and the privacy of that data is preserved at that lower level. However, from the standpoint of the workflow of the person who's doing that work day in, day out, as a support engineer or manager of that team, you're not caring what clients you're working with. You're just trying to successfully process that ticket and close that experience in a positive manner. All systems for a managed service provider in this day and age are considered multi-tenancy. And for those who are not familiar with multi-tenancy, basically it is what you'll consider kind of a grandparent, parent-child type hierarchy. Meaning as a provider, my goal for efficiency is to be able to deploy services to the endpoint, the end user, in such a way that end user within that company, their data is siloed in a sense, but siloed underneath a parent, or in this case, a grandparent. We then have the ability as a managed service provider to be able to access the data, which is sensitive to each of those underlying companies, but process it centrally, and have the element of logical security through the system and its architecture. So the data is separated, the data maintains its sovereignty relative to that location or customer, but from the workflow processing standpoint, there is an overriding capacity to be able to manage, monitor, and affect a result for the various issues that are percolating to the top. Compliance team members that of course have come to me within compliance service provider practices, biggest challenge has been most of the legacy archiving systems that are deployed today don't have that ability to provide that multi-tenancy, that single sign-on, that single login process. But more importantly, it's not just that capability of that hierarchy of multi-tenancy, it's the ability to work this ticket process, this compliance ticketing or workflow, again, for multiple customers, for multiple issues, but be able to denote or delegate specific team members within that compliancy service provider practice to basically manage the activity or monitor the communication channels from that higher level of visibility. This gives them the protection and regulatory control under the covers for that data, privacy, data security, et cetera, but gives the compliance service provider the element or the tools for efficiency through that multi-tenant, single sign-on, permission-based architecture. Very common in the IT services space. We'd like to see it more common in the compliance supervision space. And that, quite frankly, is probably how James and I connected, is that I had a challenge with a very large derivatives consulting practice where they were managing hundreds of underlying customers in the futures and options space in terms of compliance supervision. And they, as James mentioned earlier, were forced to log into the archives, the legacy archives, for each of those individual customers. That was not an efficient process. They came to me specifically for architecting or looking into solutions that would pull all those channels together, centrally provide an archive, but give them the power and control with the tools and the workflow around managing that as an outsourcer. Key differentiators in my mind, in this day and age for a provider of that type of service.
Yes. So we've got a client in the US, an eponymous CCO that deals with about 250 firms for which it's the CCO. They were spending multiple millions a year in their manual processing of each client's communications. And it was a very resource intensive manual process with a whole load of random sampling that wasn't really very good. And the outcomes were poor. The client was finding it costly. The results were patchy. Things were getting missed that should have been found. Things were being found that potentially should have been missed. We put in our system and replaced that entire build with one person. So one person was able to review on an exception management basis all of the activity across 200 client firms. So the firm that we were dealing with moved from having virtually everybody was involved by logging in and having credentials and doing different things and ticking different boxes to one person providing the service, one person providing the triage, one person providing the investigation, all as the same person. And that enabled the client that we had to offer their clients a completely automated service. There was a very, very consistent approach across everybody because it was policy driven. The policy had defined what was being looked for across all 200 firms. The same suspicious terms, lexicons were being used across the firms. The same approach was being taken to triage across all the firms. The same investigations was being undertaken if any items of suspicion had been found, and the same review process to keep the lexicons up to date was being followed. And this, pardon me, turned the cost base down significantly from a couple of £1 million down to the mid $150,000 to $200,000 mark. So we saved, pardon me, an order of magnitude of cost within that supervision business through automation. The benefits also was that rather than random sampling all of the different clients' emails, they were sampling everything. So therefore, they were able to offer a much richer service. Pardon me, I'm going to die. Eric, would you mind talking about smaller customers as well while I cough myself to bits here?
Sure, more than welcome. Well, I think one of the topics that James and I had spoken on a number of occasions is, I believe, where the opportunity exists to support from a compliance supervision outsourcing perspective, even the smallest of customer. I mean, some of the challenges that I'm finding in my consulting practice is that there are many firms that have taken the approach that if the client is smaller, meaning let's say a 1 to 10 person shop, they don't want to deal with them, right? There's not enough revenue on the table. Potentially that opportunity is something that is not possibly cost efficient for them. I would argue that with the right mix of technologies, from this standpoint of multi-tenancy, from the standpoint of a workflow that is specifically designed around efficiency, I believe you can support even the smallest of clients by having a consistent approach on the back end to how this is being archived, being able to reuse rule sets that are common across a specific vertical or industry segment. Let's say it could be futures and options. It could be potentially securities trading, right? There might be common keywords or rules. There might be separate keywords or rules associated with those specific markets or instruments. So by being able to reuse those rule sets to drive the selection, the automated selection process, and having the efficiency of an overlying ticketing process and reporting tool set around that ticketing process, I believe, whether, again, it's a one-person shop that you're supporting or a 500-person shop that wants to outsource it, I believe the opportunity is there on both ends of the spectrum. And I think because a lot of the larger consulting practices do not want to go downstream, that makes it even more potentially profitable for consultants who would like to take that slightly different view. Use the tools that make it efficient to go downstream, and then go out to that marketplace to potentially provide it. And this is something that I've seen in my discussions with smaller consulting firms that are handling, let's say, the RIA space, or as I mentioned earlier, the futures and options or derivative instrument space. The size of client is a little bit smaller, yet they still need the service to be delivered to be in regulatory compliance.
So in terms of the market, the majority of financial services firms globally are sub 20 people. So the solution that needs to be offered is one that fits in with all client sizes, but the sweet spot is offering a service that costs in for people that are about 20, 25 people big, because that's where most financial services businesses are. Sure, there are some enormous whales that do investment banking and large asset managers, but your standard broker dealers, your standard RIAs, your standard wealth managers, they're reasonably small shops. Now, the good thing there is that they are really up for outsourcing because they realize they can't do it themselves. And actually, under all regulatory regimes, you can outsource the delivery, but not the obligations under the rule set. So all of these firms know that they need to do some form of supervision. The market as it exists at the moment is consultants sending in people to do the job. So effectively, if you're a compliance consultancy and offering email supervision, then possibly you are pricing it up by saying that's one consultant, 1 day, every month. And that's how you're reaching your price, and that's how you're building your delivery model. Now, our proposition is that you can automate all of that. So sure, price it at one consultant day a month, so $1,500 a month or whatever that happens to be. But with automation, you can deliver the service phenomenally more cost effectively than paying that consultant 1 day's worth of consulting salary to do that job. And in the clients that we've seen that have used the system, they are getting orders of magnitude of cost saving across the board from the model of getting people to do it, because the computer is analyzing everything. The computer is then assessing on the basis that the policy that you've set has given it and presenting exceptions to be managed. So no longer do the consultants have to go in and do the search. No longer do the consultants have to go in and order the search results or randomly sample voice stuff. The system scans everything. The system risk ranks everything and presents the most likely items for the consultants to review. Now, what we've also seen is that people have pulled the consultants to do that because there's such a time and cost saving in the automation that's provided in our system. We found that one consultant can manage 250 firms in terms of the initial triage of the communication supervision. This releases a load of consulting time to go off and offer higher value services to clients. The other thing that we found is that as part of the review process of the exception items, consultants have been able to offer value-added services such as gifts and entertainment training, compliance culture training, sales appropriateness training, because the system is telling them over time where the biggest risks for their clients are. And it's a very interesting debate that some of our clients have with some of their clients, where they say, we noticed that a lot of the supervision that we're identifying could be nipped in the bud if you did some training in gifts and entertainment, or if you did some training in appropriate sales technique. And then you will find as a client that your clients really start trusting you as a trusted partner rather than just as a service provider. And so the real growth opportunity that we're offering into the service provider space is the automation platform for communication supervision. So you are able to offer what traditionally is a human intensive process that can only be priced on effectively a time and materials basis, and allowing you to decouple the price from the delivery and driving down the cost of the delivery while increasing the value for the price that you're offering your customers. Now, there is a tiny and slight downside to that in the fact that it's a technical solution. And if you are a compliance consultancy, then you will be asked technical questions by your clients as you move into the areas of supervision, because underlying it all, it's an email system or a WhatsApp app or an iPhone or a telephone. And so therefore, we have a very strong partnership with Broadwalk IT, because what Eric can bring to the party is the reassurance of all of the technology, because nobody likes to go in front of a client and not know the answer to things and not being able to find out the answer. Eric, do you just want to outline quite how the two bits and pieces fit together within a service provider environment?
Sure. Well, from the standpoint of initial recommendations, spin up of the or implementation of the services that power the environment of supervision, no doubt, I've had extensive experience with my customers through that entire workflow process. The projects tend to focus on those two key areas: books and records maintenance. Clearly, archiving, of course, is a key component of that books and records maintenance, along with e-file storage. And the other is the technical underpinning to provide the mechanism by which these comm channels can be captured. So that might be potentially agent-based products that are running on a mobile device. These could be back-end configurations that need to be done to support these mobile workers who are utilizing these communication channels. In the case of voice, potentially it requires some interfacing with a voice over IP provider to ensure that we are able to gain access to the media channels for the actual voice recordings, and coordinate that effort with, for example, James, of course, and his team for the archival process. But holistically, we are continually looking at the both compliance / information security requirements of a customer to meet cybersecurity requirements, general InfoSec requirements for other areas of sensitive data, could be proprietary trading data, et cetera, that of course must be protected, as well as ensuring that all those systems are joined together in such a way that storage, archiving, workflow, or access to that content is done efficiently and effectively. And that, I think, is the process of digital transformation for a lot of small to mid-sized firms, is that usually they have point products that have been cobbled together. Our approach has always been to look holistically at all these pieces, but it always drives back to auditability and accountability. every single thing, whether it's cybersecurity events or compliance-related events, all of that has to feed into an audit mindset that an external auditor, whether that's a regulatory auditor or for some reason there's an independent audit that's being conducted, that SOX or similar, that the systems are in place to provide the audit-related evidence that supports that type of inquiry. We, or me personally, have always looked at that as an audit-focused process from a technology perspective.
Thank you. So what, in summary, we're saying is that unlike a compliance engagement where you're going in to tell people what they can and can't trade, how they should or shouldn't set up their investment committee, which is very process and has no real touch points with external systems. It's an interpretation of the rules. When you get into the more messy type of ongoing services, quite a few of them will touch IT. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing PA dealing monitoring or compliance attestation scheduling or training in various areas. A lot of the services that are good, reliable, recurring revenue have an IT component. And so therefore, when you're choosing a vendor, you should choose a vendor carefully because they would need to bring that IT experience and capability with them, either within a trusted partner or within some external framework that enable you as the compliance offerer, the compliance service provider, to actually provide a service and know that you're not going to be embarrassed when the client turns around and says, so how exactly do we capture WhatsApp messages on our phones? So I think we've got 5 or so minutes left. I will throw open to any questions, should anybody have any, either on compliance question times, look at that, compliance supervision, or the IT components around it, or the regulatory framework that is driving it, or the ability for service providers in this area to create a business around supervision as a service. So, what is the standard time? Oh, look, I hope all of you can see these questions. That's pretty neat, isn't it? In terms of implementing a supervision platform, we're a supervision platform provider. We can provide the platform in a matter of a day or two. However, what is important is the tuning. What we've found is that you can provide a system with a pre-built lexicon. What are you searching for? But a lot of what you're searching for is vernacular based. So the sports teams in Philadelphia are utterly different from the sports teams in Paris. And that's where a lot of the gifts and entertainment's suspicious terms will be. We often find that we have to hand over to companies like Eric's to say, here's how we'll get the voice traffic that you've got in. Oh, you've got a different chat channel, Trillion or something like that we've never heard of. Maybe we can get the IT provider to help us out by coercing that into email so we can ingest it into the system. So if you've got a standard communications mix, and that goes to everything from Refinitiv and ICE Chat through to MyRep Chat and Ring Central and Cloud9 with Bloomberg and email in the middle, it's relatively quick and simple to set this up. Eric, do you have any?
Yes. So from the standpoint of multi-channel, I must apologize. I had lost audio. Could you just repeat the question again?
So it was, how quickly could you set up a supervision platform?
Well, generally speaking, most of my clients usually are providing us a very limited time window for setting up a supervision environment. We've had frequently a 2 to 4 week period within which to set up a smaller practice, let's say a new RIA or a new potentially NFA-based IB or CTA. Generally speaking, we like to enter into the picture very early on, especially with a new entrant into the marketplace, simply so we ensure that the framework is in place from a technology perspective to facilitate an easier plug-in to these archival services, setting up journaling, setting up APIs to various sources. A lot of it is driven around the number of channels, the complexity of those channels. Are they channels that have been supported in the past, or is potentially this a new system, such as a new voice over IP system that may not yet have been supported? Clearly, that can require developmental time, of course, on the provider side, such as yourself, James. But from our perspective, usually utilizing multiple technicians to handle the administrative and configuration-related issues on the back end, setting up and deploying is basically based on the either existing environment, or if it's a new environment, one which we can, in a sense, create a conduit or easy path through which to implement those solutions. From the standpoint of comm channels, no doubt, agent-based products usually are deployed via scripted RMM type agents if these are on the desktop environment. So we have the ability to automate that process, at least to Windows, Mac, and Linux-based machines. Mobiles tend to be a little bit more involved, requiring products like Intune, et cetera, to deploy. But usually the small environment, 2 to 4 weeks. A larger environment, of course, is subject to the complexity of the number of channels, number of users, and the architecture of management in place.
And in terms of archiving providers, traditionally the market has had the big external vendors, and we kind of can name them without too many problems. What is interesting to me is that Microsoft is now moving onto their turf, and Microsoft allow you to archive to FINRA or SEC or FCA standards by clicking a button across on their system. That leaves the archiving of the interesting stuff. So LinkedIn, WhatsApp, things like that. So I think the trick in terms of a cost-effective bill for firms is to work out what you can get with G Suite and Office 365, and then work out what the deltas are for the other channels you have. And there are some fantastic partner offerings from sources like MirrorWeb or Signal Sentry or Telemessage that allow you to collect and archive the bits that Microsoft aren't going to do for you free and automatically. Now, I understand that at scale, you may want an external vendor, but for small, medium vendors up to 250 people, you can pretty much get everything for the price that you've got within your environment, and then you're looking at the specialists around the outside. And again, this is where having Eric on board is essential, because he will be able to guide the clients through all of those different decisions, because one size very much does not fit all when it comes to the build of saving and archiving data. Eric, do you have any final thoughts on that? We've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. A lot of clients, especially on the formation or in the formation stages, come to us with a lot of those initial questions. What platform do we select? What email provider? What encryption service? What EDR antivirus tool potentially needs to be implemented? I've taken an approach, based on my various roles within the CISO space, in looking rather holistically at these requirements across, or normalizing across all of these regulations. Bottom line is, the regulations might be slightly different, but the requirements, generally speaking, under the covers are the same. And that makes it a little bit easier from a technology perspective to look for best of breed tools. Clearly, you gain the efficiencies of the workflow of being able to implement those tools consistently and quickly. So we do look for consistency. We do look for those products that are geared more towards the financial services sector and those obligations underneath it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So we're just about out of time. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I hope that you found a nugget of value in the last hour of our chat. That would be exceptional if you have. If you'd like to get hold of Fingerprint Supervision, Broadwalk IT, myself or Eric, our contact details will be below on the LinkedIn chat. We will circulate our details after this LinkedIn Live to everybody that's attended, just so that you've got them. I believe the LinkedIn Live will be rewatchable should you have trouble sleeping at any point in your life over the next month or so. And thank you very much from me. Goodbye, Eric.
Thank you as well. Greatly appreciate your attention today, and of course are here to provide any advisement that you or a colleague might require. Thank you again, James, for having me.
Bye.
You bet.